G'day everyone, welcome back to another video on the channel. So with the AFL fixture releasing the other day ago, I thought it'd be a great idea to bring back this video I did last year, dissecting and having a look on what AFL club has a hard or easy fixture. Of course, the mainstream media have their say on the fixture difficulty, but I like to take it a step further by adding in more accurate and relevant calculations, adding in factors such as home field advantage, the opponent's teams play twice, and the first and last few rounds of the home and away season. So if you're going to enjoy today's video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, that'd be heavily appreciated, and let's get into it. So obviously, right off the bat, the first question everyone wants to know, Riley, how do you do these calculations? It's a little bit different of a formula from last year's edition, so let me explain. First off, I grabbed every AFL club's percentage from the 2023 ladder. And then from those percentages, I added a 10% bonus. The reason I've added 10% to these numbers is because these percentages will be used as part of the home field advantage aspect of the calculation. And then for column 3, I added the values of column 1 and 2 for each club. You may have guessed it, the third column will be used in the calculation for the opponents that clubs play twice. So with all the percentages gathered, it was time to do the calculation process. For this example, let's go with the Adelaide Crows. First off, I calculated an all-game score. I went through each AFL club's home and away fixture, rounds 1 to 24, and gathered who are they playing throughout their 23 games. And then quite simply for each game, I put down the relevant percentage. And remember, if a team is playing another specific team at their home ground, I use the 10% bonus calculation we did in column 2, and vice versa. With all the numbers punched in, we get the all-game score. And then we move on to the teams twice score. Each AFL club has 6 opponents they play twice. So I went through every AFL club's 6 teams they play twice and added the third column calculation to get the total. And then the final calculation, we have the first 3 and last 3 round score. If you watched last year's video, you might be familiar with this one. The same calculating principle follows for the calculations we did earlier, but simply we add in the club's first 3 and last 3 round opponents' percentage. I feel the first 3 and last 3 round score is quite necessary because, especially the last 3 rounds of a season, they are usually season defining games. Same as the first 3, you always want a club to start a season well. However, with the flat total, I feel like it's a bit too much of the influence, so I divide it by 25%, and then we get our first 3 and last 3 round score. With the 3 scores now all calculated, we add them up and we get the total score. And then I round to the nearest one. So yeah, quite a bit of a process. I probably overdid myself with this one, but I feel like numbers wise, this is probably one of the most accurate ways we can determine the difficulty of an AFL fixture. So with the calculation process now explained, let's go through every AFL club and see who has an easy or hard fixture. So as usual, we'll kick things off with the Adelaide Crows. We just used them in the example, but we'll quickly go over them again. The teams they play twice is the Brisbane Lions, Essendon, Geelong, Hawthorn, Port Adelaide and the Swans. Their first 3 opponents are the Suns, Geelong and Fremantle, and last 3 some tough ones here against the Bulldogs, Port Adelaide and the Swannies away. So their difficulty score, we just saw it before, we'll put it down again anyway, 3,953, which is the 6th most difficult fixture. The runners up from last year, the Brisbane Lions, the teams they play twice is Adelaide, Collingwood, Gold Coast, GWS, Melbourne and St Kilda. Their first 3 opponents is Carlton at home, Fremantle and Collingwood, and their last 3 games is against the Giants, the Pies and Essendon. Well, according to this formula, they have the hardest fixture out of any club. Their difficulty score is 4,095, which is first. For the Blue Baggers now, the teams they play twice is Collingwood, Geelong, Giants, North Melbourne, Port Adelaide and Richmond. First 3 opponents is the Lions, Richmond and North Melbourne, and their last 3 games is against Hawthorn, West Coast and St Kilda. They'll be pretty content with this difficulty score of 3,922, which is the 10th most difficult. For the Premiers now, Collingwood, the teams they play twice is Brisbane, Carlton, Essendon, Hawthorn, Melbourne and Sydney. Their first 3 games is against the Giants, the Swans and the Saints. And for the last 3 games, some difficult opponents here against the Swans, Brisbane and Melbourne to close off their home and away season. Well, as expected, they do have a difficult fixture given they were the Premiers last year, with a difficulty score of 3,966 being the 4th most difficult. For the Essendon Bombers now, the teams they play twice is Adelaide, Collingwood, Gold Coast, St Kilda, the Swans and the Eagles. Their first 3 games is against the Hawks, Sydney and St Kilda, and their last 3 opponents is against the Suns, the Swans and Brisbane. Their difficulty score is 3,920, which is the 11th most difficult. For the Fremantle Dockers now, seeking a bit of a bounce back season, the teams they play twice is Melbourne, Port Adelaide, Richmond, the Swans, West Coast and the Bulldogs. The first 3 games is against Brisbane, North Melbourne and Adelaide, and the last 3 games is against Geelong, GWS and Port Adelaide. And their difficulty score is 3,885, which is the 12th most difficult. For the Geelong Football Club now, and the teams they play twice is Adelaide, Carlton, Hawthorn, North Melbourne, St Kilda and the Bulldogs. The first 3 games is up against the Saints, Adelaide and Hawthorn, and the last 3 games is against the Dockers, the Saints and West Coast. Well, if there's any Geelong fans, they'll be pretty happy to hear that they have quite an easy fixture according to the numbers. Their difficulty score is 3,861, which is the 15th most difficult. For the Gold Coast Suns now, the teams they play twice is Brisbane, Essendon, GWS, North Melbourne, Richmond and West Coast. Their first 3 games is up against the Tigers, Adelaide and the Bulldogs, and they close off their home and away season against Essendon, Melbourne and Richmond. Well, for Gold Coast, this is probably their best chance to finally make a maiden finals appearance, as they have the easiest fixture out of any club in the competition with a difficulty score of 3,688. The easiest fixture in the comp. Next up, the Giants. The teams they play twice is Brisbane, Carlton, the Suns, Hawthorn, the Swannies and the Bulldogs. Their first 3 games is up against the Pies and then North Melbourne and West Coast. And the last 3 games is against Brisbane, Fremantle and the Bulldogs. And their difficulty score is sitting as the 7th most difficult, with that being 3,951. For the Hawks now, the teams they play twice is Adelaide, Collingwood, Geelong, the Giants, North Melbourne and Richmond. Their first 3 opponents is up against the Dons, Melbourne and then the Giants. And the last 3 games is against Carlton, Richmond and North Melbourne. Now amazingly, the bottom 4 team from last year actually has the 5th most difficult fixture in 2024, with that score being 3,985. Now for the Melbourne Football Club, the teams they play twice is the Lions, Collingwood, Fremantle, Port Adelaide, Eagles and the Bulldogs. They kick off their season against the Swans, then the Bulldogs and then the Hawks. And the last 3 games of the home and away season is against Port Adelaide, the Suns and the Pies. Their difficulty score is 3,929, making it the 9th most difficult fixture. For the North Melbourne Kangaroos now, the teams they play twice is Carlton, Geelong, the Suns, Hawthorn, West Coast and the Bulldogs. The first 3 games is up against the Giants, Fremantle and Carlton, and their last 3 games is against the Eagles, the Bulldogs and the Hawks. And as expected, they do have one of the easiest fixtures out of any club, with a difficulty score of 3,773, making it the 17th most trickiest. Now for the Port Adelaide Power, the teams they play twice is, as per usual, the Adelaide Crows, then Carlton, Fremantle, Melbourne, Richmond and St Kilda. Their first 3 games is against the Eagles at home, then Richmond and then Melbourne. And the last 3 games is against Melbourne, a showdown against Adelaide and then the Fremantle Dockers. Well, once again, Port Adelaide have another difficult fixture 2 years in a row, with their difficulty score being 4,030, making it the 2nd most difficult fixture. For the Richmond Tigers now, the teams they play twice is Carlton, Fremantle, Gold Coast, Hawthorn, Port Adelaide and St Kilda. Their first 3 games is against the Gold Coast Suns, Carlton and then Port Adelaide, and their last 3 games is against St Kilda, Hawthorn and the Gold Coast Suns. Their difficulty score is 3,881, making it the 13th most difficult. Now for the St Kilda Saints, the teams they play twice is Brisbane, Essendon, Geelong, Port Adelaide, Richmond and West Coast. Their first 3 games is up against the Cats at GMHBA Stadium, and then Collingwood and then Adelaide, and the last 3 games is the Tigers, followed by Geelong and then Carlton. Their difficulty score is 3,814, making it the 16th most difficult. That's definitely a good sight to see if you're a Saints fan. And now for the Sydney Swans, the teams they verse twice are the Adelaide Crows, Collingwood, Essendon, Fremantle, GWS and the Western Bulldogs. The first 3 games is up against the D's, then Collingwood and then Essendon, and they close off their home and away season against the Pies, followed by Essendon and then Adelaide at home. And once again, for back-to-back seasons, the Swans have another difficult fixture, with their difficulty score being 4,029, just behind Port Adelaide, sitting in the 3rd most difficult. Now for the Wooden Spooners of the West Coast Eagles, the teams they play twice is Essendon, Fremantle, Gold Coast, Melbourne, North, and then the Saints. And then they do have as their first 3 games Port Adelaide, GWS, and the Bulldogs, and the last 3 up against the North Melbourne Kangaroos, Carlton, and Geelong. Their difficulty score is 3,876, making it the 14th most difficult, so not even sitting in the bottom 4 of the most easiest. And finally, last but not least, the Western Bulldogs. The teams they verse twice are the Fremantle Dockers, Geelong, GWS, Melbourne, North Melbourne and the Swans. Their first 3 games they do verse the Melbourne Demons, then Gold Coast and then the Eagles, and the last 3 games is up against Adelaide, North and GWS. Their difficulty score is 3,935, making it the 8th most difficult. So everyone, on your screens right now is the recap of the fixture difficulty, first being the hardest all the way down to 18th being the easiest. Make sure to comment down below and let me know what you did think of this video and the formula itself. Obviously I did change it from last year's edition. I wanted to make it a little bit more accurate with a few more factors added in, but let's be honest, we can all agree we don't actually know how difficult a fixture is going to be until we view it in a retrospective format. We've got to see the games next year because not every club is going to be the same as of this season. So this is really the best we can do with the numbers we have provided. But it's always a fun video to do, so make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you did go on to enjoy today's video. And apart from that, I will talk to you later. See you later, fellas.